Nsanyusa balaba. Leero ngenda bagamba biboozi by'amaanyi nnyo era mutereke kumpulira. Mujeebale. Amanya gange nze Helena. Most, if not all of you, did not understand a word I just spoke. And that is precisely my point. Many of Africa's languages, enriched with history and brimming with unique identity, are steadily becoming foreign to those whose ancestors once spoke fluently in. You may think, how ironic. I think this is the unfinished business of colonization, an enduring force that still exists in our society today, contrary to popular belief. However, now, it has managed to disguise itself, rather subtly. Its legacy persists in the subconscious of countless Africans today, distancing us from our lingual roots and encouraging us to lean towards more useful languages, as if ours aren't already useful. Today, the call to decolonize our minds is not just symbolic, it is urgent. In fact, a staggering number, around 40% of the world's languages, are endangered, with numerous languages in Africa being the most at risk. In reclaiming pride in our languages, we reclaim not just words, but the essence of our identities. Take Ngu language, for example. South Africa is home to Ngu, an ancient tongue over 25,000 years old, holding the prestigious status of the oldest indigenous language in the country. Once, like French and Portuguese, Ngu speakers thrived in a vibrant community where their language flourished, a privilege they have no more. Not they, but she. A community of thousands has managed to decrease to just one. Katrina Esau, the one and only speaker of Ngu. Can you imagine speaking a language so foreign that not a single person understands you? What a dramatic shift she's witnessed in her lifetime alone. From the oral tradition of passing down Ngu through family and friends, to the oppressive era where the white minority rulers strategically promoted fluency in the colonial language, Afrikaans. They believed that the native speakers posed a threat to their safety, that they were discussing plans of escape, or perhaps insulting them. As a result, they enforced the colonial language into education, whilst heavily frowning upon the use of native tongues. And today, we see that same shame in Africans, subjecting the expression of their identity to the Western standard imposed on them. How did we get to this point? Katrina says she stopped speaking the language as a very young girl after being convinced that it was ugly, a decision she regrets to this day. Now, what does one do after being convinced that the way they speak is ugly, that the way they speak is classless, that the way they speak is old-fashioned? They improve their ways. Except the word improve does not suggest at all what is happening here. Instead, it is planting a false idea of improvement, where progression and development are confused for westernization, when in fact, no. Westernization does not equate development nor progression. But being as young as she was, I do not blame her for not knowing better, because she was conditioned to think of her identity as lesser than. And who wants to be lesser than, right? In fact, now, at age 91, she's working to undo the effects of that decision. She exemplifies passion for the preservation of her culture, as she's involved in numerous works aimed at possibly reviving Ngu. The most prominent one being her school, where she teaches young children the language. Her actions have rightfully earned her a doctorate from the University of Cape Town as an appreciation for her unwavering commitment. However, there's only so much that one person can achieve in the Herculean task of reviving a whole language. But I can't help and think to myself, how devastating would it be for Ngu to die to a language of the colonizer? This issue, though subtle, is deeply ingrained in African communities, with a legacy of colonialism continuing to devalue native language as believed themselves by the native people. Reflecting on my own life, I realize a dangerously similar upbringing Katrina and I share. When I was only 8, my parents made a decision, an important decision. They insisted, at home, we will only speak in Luganda. English is foreign to us. You only speak English when you are at school. I hated this rule. I really did. And being the stubborn child I was, I translated it to, I'll just speak much less at home than I do at school. This way, I don't have to waste my energy learning a language that is of no use outside the gates of my home. And I mean, it was true. I rarely ever spoke Luganda. Friends didn't speak their native languages either. But if they did, they knew to say, hello, my name is, but what use was that going to add to my life, right? So why were my parents forcing me to waste energy learning mine? Not to mention, it was ridiculously hard for me to learn. And to add to its uselessness, I made particular note of those who spoke English and those who spoke Luganda. What do I mean? Well, at school, the teachers who drove good cars and had the latest MacBooks spoke English. They came from foreign countries, and they boasted of the Christmas breaks they spent in Switzerland skiing. And on the other hand, we have the cooks and the cleaners who did not speak English. But if they did, they spoke what Uganda knows as Yuglish, a mix of English and Luganda with its own unique set of colloquialisms. But to the outside world, it would just be labeled embarrassingly broken English. Anyway, these cooks and cleaners were guaranteed to be fluent in Luganda. They owned phones that looked like bricks, and they certainly did not boast of the Christmas breaks spent in Switzerland skiing. So there was a clear divide, and this pattern repeated itself everywhere. Luganda meant poverty, and English meant, wow, she speaks English. She must spend her Christmas breaks in Switzerland. Or in other words, wealth. And not just wealth in terms of money, but in the options I could have for a job and the quality of my life in general. So, did speaking English mean I had a better chance of Christmas in Switzerland? To 8-year-old me, heck yes. And that meant I was going to strive to speak as eloquently as my white teachers did. But at the devastating expense of fluency and appreciation for my own. I now understand that I perceived English as a status symbol indicating better than. I aspired to be that better than. And I think my parents did too. They set me on track with my name, Helena, Greek for shining light and a variation of the names Eleanor and Helen. This wasn't just a family decision or a trend that my parents decided to follow. This choice reflects a nationwide reality in Africa. Essentially, the common belief is that foreign languages, superior to our own, are a uniting force. Yet native languages, what is familiar, are thought to divide us. In fact, Uganda's official language is English. And according to the University of Pennsylvania, it is spoken predominantly by educated Ugandans. Excuse me for being sensitive, but currently in my English class, we're learning about diction and how writers intentionally choose their words. So while this may be true, by linking education to English fluency, we reinforce a deep-seated notion that intellectual worth and social progress come with a foreign language. This only encourages more and more Ugandans, and on the wider scale, Africans, to learn English, and not simply for practicality, but as a mark of being educated. I have an interesting fact. Does anyone in the crowd know the world's largest French-speaking city? You can just shout out your answer. Kinshasa? Yes, Kinshasa, in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Or perhaps, does anyone in the crowd know where the world's largest English-speaking city may be? You can shout out your answer again. New York, London, Cape Town? No. Mumbai. These examples reveal the reach and impact of foreign languages across different cultures. And for me, they highlight my personal struggle to feel a sense of belonging. Because my parents, like many others, equated Western names and language with success and societal acceptance. This created a subtle, even unconscious, rejection from my own African roots, reinforcing the belief again that to develop, one must adopt what is foreign, not celebrate what is inherently theirs. Adopt what is foreign and not celebrate what is inherently theirs. This is a very important thing to unlearn. And no, this is not just Africa's issue. In fact, just 39 years ago, Olelo, a language home to Hawaii, was on the verge of extinction, as only 32 island children spoke the language, meeting the criteria by far to be labeled as an endangered language. So yes, endangered languages are indeed a global concern. So my aim, it is to amplify Katrina's voice because she stands as a representation of what could but should not be for so many communities, not only in Africa, but all across the globe. And specifically, languages relying solely on oral pass-down and or have unconventional phonetics or click sounds, at least in comparison to English. They face heightened risk of extinction because they lack a means to physically document their work in dictionaries, which in the modern day is simply not sustainable. And in a world that prioritizes economic opportunity over cultural preservation, the fight for our languages is a fight for our authentic identity, a fight we must win. Now, I'd like to invite you to close your eyes for a moment. Imagine yourself on a beautiful beach, perhaps Porto Viejo, with your loved ones. Everything exactly as it should be. The sun against your skin, the breeze against your clothes, and suddenly, someone you love is speaking to you, and you can hear them, but you can't seem to make sense of what they're saying. Open your eyes. Maybe they were asking for something simple, like a glass of water or a towel, but your languages were too different to understand each other. So does that mean you cease all communication? No. With loved ones, you make that effort to communicate, that fight to understand each other. So think of the languages that define your identity, your family, and your community. That is why I encourage you to use your voice as a mirror to reflect who and what you are. And by the way, do not get me wrong, fluency in English is not something bad. The issue only arises when it is used to marginalize against native speakers, or when it is prioritized over fluency in your own. So this all means fluency in your native tongue, your mother tongue, has priority. Now I say this to you as I'm still recovering from the effects that 8-year-old me made. As the Luganda speakers could have told by the very beginning of this speech, no, I'm not perfectly fluent, but I am striving to be perfectly fluent. So A for effort, right? To the Africans, let us work together in the pursuit of a resolved state of identity. And to each and every one of you in the audience, take the initiative to learn and practice your mother tongue. It is such an important element of your identity. In fact, in the short period I've spent in this very international school, I've learned that when you're immersed in an environment with people from all over the world, you cannot escape the need to define who you are. You'll be asked to say something in your language, and this is the most common question you'll get as someone is trying to understand where you are, where you're from. And if you can't say it in your language, well, you're just not adding to the celebrated diversity. So what is my call to action? 1, if you're like me, Duolingo is a resource that you rely on when going about learning a language. However, the app is limited in terms of its availability of African languages. This makes an impossible task only that much harder. But I believe we can't put the blame solely on the app developer Louis von Ahn. This is ultimately a matter of supply and demand. If there isn't a demand for learning your language, then there simply can't be a supply of the resources to support it. And so that demand is necessary, it is essential. 2, challenging social norms. Speak your language proudly and challenge the idea that proper or educated languages are ones that are foreign to your own. Cool to speak your language. We are in desperate need of that sense of pride in our identities. And the more we normalize it, the more we will protect its future. 3, think about your children or your future children, if at all you plan to have them. When we neglect our languages, we rob our children of a piece of their identity. A piece of their identity that they're entitled to know about, by the way. But you have the power to give them a sense of pride in their identity. So pass your language down with love. Show them that their heritage is something to be celebrated. The floor is now yours. Do you want to learn your language? Are you demonstrating that interest? I certainly hope so. Thank you.